Hey there, all. It is Corey here, founder and financial advisor at Verse. I hope that you and your families and everyone in your life is going well and is safe and is enjoying the silver linings of ISO. There's plenty of them if you're looking for them. I again have my counterpart, one of the financial advisors here at Verse Wealth, Ashley Bishop, joining us for our weekly update. Ash, good to see you. How you doing?
You too, Corey. Yeah, doing well. Friday, nice weekend ahead. Nice warm autumn weather. So got the shorts on earlier today, which is very pleasing.
The
And
shorts?
looking forward to a bit of a chat with you again this afternoon.
Lovely. Well, thanks for joining us. This week's update is going to be a bit shorter than recent weeks. From a financial market point of view, there hasn't been too much happening, and we don't want to buff this out any longer than we need to. There really is one key question that we want to answer today, in light of the PM's announcement this afternoon around the three-stage easing of the restrictions. And that question is, what's the likely impact of easing restrictions in Australia on markets? And Ash is here to answer that question for us in just a moment. Just before we do, in terms of, I guess, a few of the headlines affecting investment markets and portfolios this week, we saw the Australian market up about 3% this week, so reasonable and modest gains. Some of that's on the back of the fact that the Reserve Bank met on Tuesday morning and they announced that rates were staying where they are, and that is at record lows of 0.25. There was, in terms of their commentary, an optimistic outlook in terms of where the Australian economy is headed. They were talking about unemployment likely to peak at about 10%. In June, it was about 5% pre-COVID-19 and be down as low as about 7% by the end of the year. Obviously, things can change, but all things being equal, given what we've been through and are still going through, that's not a bad economic outcome. In terms of the US, so again, we've got the S&P 500 here. They've had a relatively flat week. Still up about almost 30% from their lows of March 23. So that's a significant rebound, which again is a contradiction to their economy and where it's headed. And they had another 3 million Americans file, sadly, for unemployment this week. That takes that total during this crisis to over 33 million. So to give you a bit more perspective, California is the most populated state in the US and has about 38 million people living there. So that's almost the entirety of California unemployed. So, they are continuing to struggle from an economic standpoint and from a health standpoint. They are looking at easing their restrictions, as they've kind of alluded to this week. So we'll wait and see how that unfolds. But in terms of this week, market's relatively steady. We haven't seen large levels of volatility, which is a positive. So that's a bit of an update there, guys. In terms of that key question this week, for you, Ash, with the easing of restrictions about to start across Australia, can you help us understand what impact that may have on financial markets moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Corey. Look, it's going to be an interesting one, but I think it's important to note that the announcements were made around lunchtime today on Friday, and since then, markets in Australia, at least, have been fairly flat. They really haven't moved much at all. And as of the last time I checked, you were talking about 0.6% for the day. But of course, that was pretty much the same when the announcements were made. So one of the key factors, and we've talked a little bit about this in previous messages as well, but ultimately, markets are often forward-looking. So they're considering what's going to happen next. And given that we've been talking about easing restrictions for a while now, it has sort of been popular as our cases have come down and we've flattened the curve, so to speak. It means that people and investors in particular have been looking forward and thinking, we're going to ease restrictions, we're going to know what that looks like soon. So they've already sort of factored that into their decision making. It's what we call pricing in. So the price is already reflective of the news that we've seen today because we knew it was coming. It's where something happens that we don't know it's coming or are uncertain that it's coming. Now, of course, that can go sort of up to the up and down, but that's where we see sort of significant movements based on news. But something we know is coming is unlikely to have as much of an impact, which was seen this afternoon. in terms of how that looks going forward, it is going to be important, and we've talked about this numerous times, and it remains the truth, is what the developments come from a health perspective, firstly, because as we talked about, if we see that second wave of infections, if we see series of outbreaks that we don't feel like we're getting under control, then that's going to have a negative impact on how people feel about the prospect for the economy and so forth. For example, it increases the likelihood of a second shutdown, as an example, which would be fairly devastating for a series of businesses and would have a real negative impact on how investors feel about the prospects for the market going forward. So that could be something to the negative. But if we continue to see slow and steady good progress, at least in Australia, that will help people feel more confident from a health and financial point of view. And then hopefully the rest of the world, we start to see a flattening of the curve as well. But those are really going to be the areas that are going to be the most important to look at going forward. In terms of a health perspective, from an economics perspective, we're really going to have to see how businesses react once they start going or reopening and people start going back to work. Because it's going to be really important to remember that even though the economy is sort of opening up in a COVID-safe economy, as Scott Morrison loves to say, in the reality, people are still going to be hesitant about going to work. Scott Morrison did stress in his press conference, for example, that the easing of restrictions for people going to work are going to be based on how employees feel, but more importantly, how employers feel. So there is going to start to be more pressure for people to go back to work. They're going to, some at least, be hesitant. And more importantly, they're going to be hesitant about how often they go out, so spending money and so forth. And businesses are also going to be hesitant about spending money. So that's where you see economic recovery happen, where people feel confident about spending money. It helps to stimulate more economic growth. Businesses, therefore, can open up more stores or employ more people or bring people back off the job, keep the payment. So that is going to be slow. And if that starts to drag out, or those restrictions sort of go back and forth based on whether we're allowed to go out or not allowed to go out, or allowed to go to cafes or restaurants or not, that's going to be the next sort of key points to look for. Hopefully we'll see a nice linear progression based on the 3 stages that Scott Morrison talked about today. But ultimately we're going to have to wait and see. But those are the sort of things that are going to impact markets going forward.
Sure. Thanks, Ash. That is a very comprehensive rundown. I don't think we need to dig into that any deeper. We are traversing a little bit on some of the commentary in recent weeks as well. So as we've kind of said, and you're alluding to, things are moving to the positive, but things can change quickly, and markets are looking forward and pricing things in optimistically. And if we get news that is a contradiction to what has been forecast or priced in, as you say, that's where we can see market movements up or market movements down, depending on the news. So
one thing I would say, sorry to interrupt, Corey, but one thing I would say is that not all the news that's priced in is positive. So Philip Lowe, the Reserve Bank Governor in Australia, did forecast that by June, the Australian economy would contract by 8%. So effectively that we're producing 8% less than we were pre-COVID-19. So markets have factored that in as well. So it's important not to just assume that we're only thinking about good news here. Others have tried to forecast what the bad news is, and that's also been priced in to markets. So if that starts to get worse, like you talked about the 10% unemployment that everyone sort of assumes is going to happen.
Yep.
If it ends up being 12, 13, 15, whatever it ends up being, because keep in mind those numbers do not include anyone on the JobKeeper payment, then you're starting to look at this is bad news that we did not expect. So that's a risk to the downside. But of course, if the numbers end up being more positive than expected, then that has benefits to the upside as well.
It's a really good point. And I mean, when we look at the performance of the US market in the last 4 to 6 weeks, and we look at the level of unemployment that they've seen, a large part of that is that those levels of unemployment have been factored in to markets when we saw them, come off by that 35% from Feb 20 there. So thanks, Ash. Again, your guidance and your advice is helpful, and it's valuable in these unusual times. Glad that you're well. Just so everyone knows, the entire team at Verse is well. Our families are well. Our friends are well. We have spoken with virtually all of you in recent times, some of you a number of times, and know that you're, as a group, you're doing well and making the most of these challenging times. And it's been a pleasure to really have you back and be able to support you to the best of our ability in recent times as well. So thanks for watching again. You'll hear from us shortly. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. Hopefully you've got some good weather to enjoy wherever you are in this beautiful country of ours. And we will speak with you very soon. Take care.